Good afternoon. Welcome, and thanks for joining us today. We are excited to be here to share with you our story in simplifying Salesforce deployments at Citrix. My name is Sindhuja. I'm a senior manager CRM practice at Citrix. A little bit about me. I live in South Florida with my family, and I enjoy taking my kids to the beach if there are no hurricanes or storm watching around the beach. With me, I have Shravan.
Hi, everybody. This is Shravan Gupta. I'm a lead Salesforce architect at Citrix. And in my spare time, I love jet skiing. And I also write screenplays and do impressions. I know you're all going to ask me to do an impression of Trump, but I will save that for later. Over to you, Sindhuja.
Safe harbor statement. So you guys have seen this many times. Salesforce is a public traded company. Make all of your purchasing decisions based on the products commercially available from salesforce.com. A little bit about our company, Citrix. We are a $3 billion company with growing number of customers and partners globally. At Citrix, our mission is to deliver apps and data securely over the cloud, anywhere, anytime, to any device. So before we get started with the session, let's have a quick look at Salesforce at Citrix. We implemented Salesforce in 2006 with opportunity management for all of our sales reps globally. And 10 years later now, we have a highly integrated Salesforce platform in our app landscape. And we have a customized partner portal, Service Cloud portal, and we are one of the top 100 Salesforce implementation partners. So let's get on with the session. How many of you here find deployments as a bit tedious, struggling activity? Do you have challenges with your deployments? Wow, that's a lot, so we are not just alone. So today in this session, we are going to talk about our deployment journey and how we simplified, along with the objective of what we are trying to solve, and what's our solution with a quick demo. And we are going to wrap the session with lessons learned and what's the next step for us. So since all of you are familiar with Salesforce development process, let's see how it gets started, right? Usually a project implementation gets started with a project kickoff, where the scope is identified, you get a set of requirements to implement in Salesforce platform, right? You also have the project timelines and a big team working with you, so you're not just alone. And once the requirements are there, you get on with the design. What do? As a Salesforce developer, you always wanted to go for out-of-the-box solution. That's what you get told by your team, right? Let's keep it simple. Let's start with out-of-the-box. But you and I know in reality, that's how we started. That might not how we always end. So we do see Apex coding, some customization done from our end. And you make sure you define a solution that's easy to manage and maintain going forward. So next is the development. So your team get into action. You build your solution in the sandbox. You make sure you build your solution within Salesforce governor limits, trigger bulkification, custom controllers, process builders, yada, 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 and you keep maintaining a release manifest. So you record all the changes that you do in your sandbox so that you can move it to the next environment and to production, right? So once the development is complete, you end up writing all your test classes, make sure your code coverage is good. Are you done? No. So you start working with the testing team. So you wear a different hat and start supporting all of your testers in fixing the defects, doing some change requests, and there you go, right? So finally you got an approval, you are all set to go live to production. So your project team decides, okay, let's go have a pre-release celebration. Why not, right? You worked all these days. And you head out. So let's say you wait for your first drink. You get a call from your release admins. Your release admins say, validation failed with 125 errors. How many of you have been in that state? It's a lot, right? All of us, pretty much. Like, we start saying we did the best solution, but then you end up seeing, okay, your validation failed with 125 errors. Your first response, can you check if you added all your components to the release package? Maybe you missed something to add in the change set. So you know for sure that you're going to get a call in the next 5 to 10 minutes. And sure enough, you get a call saying, I'm now receiving a different set of errors. right? So this is something not new. As Salesforce developers, we know we have to head back to office or wherever to help your release admins to get your solution validated in production. So slowly your team joins, and you know you're going to miss the party. You're going to be having your own party tackling all Salesforce validation errors, and you will be working to get them resolved before the release date. Once the release date comes, everybody's eyes will be glued to the dials to make sure it becomes green, and you just pray to yourself, let this time go through, right? So we all do that. And what went wrong here, right? What did we do that's wrong? Is it the developers that created the bad code?
Wrong.
To begin with, right? Maybe they didn't write it properly, they didn't record the components properly. Or maybe perhaps it's the release admins. They didn't spend enough time looking at your manifest to build the components. They missed out something that could impact your validation, right? Or it could be the process. Your process is complicated and very challenging. It requires you to jump through all the hoops, get all the stars aligned for you to get a successful validation. What can we do, right? Why are we in this state? So we all feel like what made us there, right? So when we started Salesforce, we had a much smaller implementation. The team was much smaller in size, and the developers were able to manage their own deployments. So they had to, most of the changes are done manually, and there was no multiple projects, right? But that didn't last long. As the platform grew, we started to implement a lot more custom coding. The team size grew, and our release admins have to constantly keep building your package to move it to the next environment. So you know it's like a machine that keeps running validation pretty much every other day, right? And at Citrix, we try to keep our deployments twice a month. I use the word try because that's not always the case. Sometimes we end up doing every week. Here is where we found, okay, we need to do something. So the transformation started. We know we need to simplify our process, making it more efficient so that it's more manageable and you're not spending your time in solving your deployment problems. So before we go into transformation, we just wanted to take a moment and see what are we trying to achieve, right? What did we want? So let's take a moment in looking at our objectives. The developers' objectives were pretty straightforward. They wanted a source-controlled, reliable source-controlled system that could help them show all the versions of their code so they know which one to include it in the final manifest. They also wanted to have a centralized release management tool that basically helped them to keep all the components and record all the metadata changes in one place. And it's just not that. They also wanted something that can see who all are working. So if it's a team of 5 or 10, you want to know what each other is working. You don't necessarily need to know on the functional, but you do need to know what is that they are exactly trying to update in what code, and if it is overlapping with my code changes, right? Asking a release admin, their ask was pretty straightforward. They wanted an app, a hassle-free app that will help them with deployments and rollback. So that's their first ask. And of course, they wanted a tool that could provide them the control and governance so that they know what was deployed when and what version or what components made it to the package. How did we get to that? So now we all know what's our problem or what's our objective. What is our solution, right? So we changed our release process with 2 guiding principles. The first one is build one package per project and keep adding your components incrementally to the same package. So you don't need to keep building it and then clone, upload it, clone, again add some, upload it, clone. And keep in mind, in Salesforce chain set, your inbound chain set cannot be converted to an outbound. So you have to make an inbound chain set. You have to again create it in your next environment to make it an outbound before you can take it to the next environment. So you are spending time by manually adding components and scoring through all of your components in the chain set to add them. The second guiding principle, let's have one consistent way to deploy to another environment. So a lot of confusion was some of them were categorized manual, some of them Apex, and you do know some of them you wanted to do before the deployment, some of them after the deployment. So you end up missing, and it's too much of documentation a developer has to do. So our guiding principle is, let's keep it simple. Let's have one way, one app, one solution to deploy to production, or your other environment. So you don't need to keep a list of manual components and change set components, right? With these two process change, what helped us? Flowsome is a solution that helped us with making this deployment process painless. So let me talk what is Flowsome. So Flowsome is an app exchange app. I have a couple of guys from Flowsome here in the audience. And it's an app exchange app. It sits on a separate org. So it's not like any other app exchange that sits on your org. It sits on a separate org, but it can connect to any number of your orgs, including sandboxes. So you make a copy of your changes, and then you deploy it to different orgs. And since it's an app exchange app on Salesforce platform, you have its own advantages. So you have less overhead in managing the admin activities for that, and it's handled by Salesforce upgrades. And you also have an option to extend or customize the tool. Though this time we did try to stick out of the box as much as possible, but I can guarantee that that's the case. So with these two simple guidelines, right, we simplified our 12-step deployment process to a 5 simple step. So we create a project, you collect all your components in one place, and then you create one package and to deploy to many environments. Again, that package is an increment package, and it's going to help you simplify and streamline the deployment activity. And you have less back and forth. So I'm going to save the rest for the demo so you can have a quick look at our solution of making it with deployment from one to another in 5 simple steps. Here you go.
Thank you, Sindhuja. This is the demo part of the presentation, and I'm going to make you acquainted to a few terminologies that we use in Flowsome before we jump right into the demo. And some of them are snapshot, branch, repository, and patch. Snapshot. Snapshots are used to retrieve your changes from the source organization. Once your developer who is working in their own personal sandboxes, or if you have a unified sandbox for all the developers to work, some companies do that, you can retrieve those changes by using a snapshot. And branches. Branches are used to develop parts of your software simultaneously. How often do we have multiple projects running at the same time? Very often. And how often do we have a same component being referred in multiple projects? I don't know about you guys, at Citrix, very often. So you wish you had a solution where you can store multiple versions of the same component that are being developed simultaneously towards different projects. That's where branches can help. The next thing is repository. How many here are aware of a version controlling system? That's pretty good. And so for those who are familiar with version controlling system, repository is a master branch or the trunk, where you have all the components and all the different versions of those components that were changed in the past. So you could go to the repository, select a component. It could be modified 20 times over the past year, and you could go and see a historical versioning of all those 20 versions, who changed it, when it was changed, and get to the right version whenever you want. That's what repository has. And the last thing is patch. Patches are nothing but outbound deployments. They're very synonymous to change sets, but unlike change sets, they're manifest driven. And so you can build them once, deploy them multiple times. Very, very helpful. So from a process standpoint, your developer makes changes in the first step right there, makes changes in the sandboxes, creates a snapshot, captures those changes, saves to Flowsome, and create a branch and commit the changes to the branch. And branches, if those changes are all done towards one project, you create one branch and commit all the changes to one branch. If they're done towards multiple projects, you commit to multiple branches, and that's how you support simultaneous development. And once you commit your branches, the next step is to commit those branches into the repository. This step is needed, and also Flowsome considers branch as a feature. So you have either the feature is completely ready or not ready. You cannot have parts of those branches ready to be checked into the repository. So once you have the whole feature ready, you can commit that branch or feature/project/branch into the repository. Okay? And from the repository is where you build your patches. Like I said, they're very manifest-driven, so you can build them once and deploy multiple times. So let's jump right into the demo. So here is where I have my, oh, okay, you can't see this. Okay, so this is a Flosum org. Like Sindhuja already specified, this is sitting on a separate org on its own, and it is connecting to all these sandbox orgs that you have in your company. If you see, there are a list of sandbox orgs and also production org that is connected. So I go to a sandbox called fdev, and let's assume that I made a few changes in this sandbox for the purposes of the demo, and I can go right into that org, and if I am able to go into the org, okay. All right, okay. I kind of live in my own reality, I guess. So imagine, if you will. So the list of orgs that I showed you are the different connections that you can make to Flowsome. So once you make those connections, you can just go into any of those sandboxes and grab the changes to the components that were done in that particular sandbox. So let's assume we made changes in the sandbox, and I can quickly create a snapshot to retrieve those changes. And snapshots does not only retrieve your changes, it retrieves the changes done by the other developers too, because what you can only mention over there is the number of days that you want to go back. If you have done a change 14 days ago, you can just put 14 and get all the changes that were done in the last 2 weeks. So there needs to be a selection and criteria, right? So you go in after the snapshot has retrieved the changes, you select the changes that are to be committed to the branch. And you make those, you select those changes and commit them to the branch. And once you commit them to the branch, and you can then commit all the branches to the repository. This is where, if you have simultaneous development being done by others who are touching the same component, this is where you identify conflicts. You have to go to the repository, you have to check your versions into the repository, and somebody else coming in, working on the same components, discover conflicts and merge their code either, or talk to you as to when you're going live versus if the version has to be rolled back, and so on. So there needs to be a lot of manual interaction that needs to happen between developers at this point, and we wish Flowsome did more merging and other capabilities that traditional software version controlling systems provide. But once you check into the repository, the patches is where it gets really interesting. Because you have multiple versions in the repository, when you add components to the patch, you don't add the components themselves, but you add specific versions of those components into the patch. If the demo worked, I could have shown you can switch versions, and so very quickly, let's say there is a class which was modified 20 times, and you go right into that component, and you can add version 18, because version 19 and 20 are not ready to go to the next environment. So that switch is really easy. And because all the components and all the versions live in the repository, you can search really quickly and see which component was modified by who in the recent past, and add that to the patch. Once you have the patch correctly built with the specific version of the components that you have marked for that particular project, you can create a request out to the release admin that Sindhu just spoke about earlier, and release admins get that request and execute on them to deploy those patches into the desired environment. All right, back to you, Sindhuja.
Thanks, Siobhan. So let's see, what did we gain? We did improve our operational efficiency by 40%. So our release admins spent less time in building chain set. So if you have a project with, let's say, 400 components, right? You have to spend at least 20 to 30 minutes in searching through all the components to add it to the chain set. So we did improve our operational efficiency and the deployment success rate. So we had more time to join in our team activities. And we simplified. It was a complex process. We now have a simplified and a streamlined deployment process. And with Flowsome, we also were able to get good reports of all the components along with what versions were deployed when. So it's not easy to go back and look at the Salesforce deployment status and extract out the data to see, okay, let me see what all components were deployed. With Flowsome, it's just a part of getting it as a part of standard Salesforce report. And of course, for developers, we now have a more dependable and reliable backup. So before we had Flowsome, we always take a copy or a refresher sandbox that has a copy of your production code. But once we had Flowsome, we now know we have all versions in the repository. So we don't need to do a refresh of sandbox and do some manual activities like changing the email address, for instance, and things like that. So we now save time because we have more dependable backups that we can go back and roll back if needed. What did we customize? I know I briefly touched saying Flowsome is an app exchange, so you can do customization, right? What did we customize? So we did add patch migration requests, so to eliminate emails back and forth saying, hey, admin, I'm done with this, can you move it? Instead, we created a simple workflow approval process, add a related list to the patch so we can create migration request, and you will get an email notification once it is complete. And we also added development checkpoints. We tried to make this as an application lifecycle tool because we do have some checkpoints like code review, design review, and you do want to put some control saying you don't want to move your code to UAT if it is not code review, for instance. So we did put some checkpoints to make sure that it meets all of your development milestones. And manual components. I know one of our guiding principles is do not have manual components, right? But you do need some cases like data fixes, mainly. You want to do some data fix before and after. So we do have a placeholder to capture all of those. So we have one centralized release management tool where you collect everything you need to do for a particular project, including the list of all components and data fixes, and if did it go through a proper checkpoint in your development lifecycle and things like that. The last but not least, I said Salesforce is an integrated environment. So we wanted to make sure that any BI reporting systems that were having dependency on a Salesforce field gets an automatic notification if something changed in your upcoming project. So let's say you added a data type, you wanted to make sure all your SSRS reports are updated as well. What did we learn? So as part of onboarding any new projects, right, so we did have to onboard our development team to use Flowsome. So remember, keep in mind, like it's 10 years. Developers have been coding with no source control in Salesforce. It's all you want. Now we have to make it a habit, saying there is no concept of check out, check in, but you still need to make sure you commit to your repository that others will know that someone is changing something. If you do not use the tool properly, then again, you won't get the benefit. So we did learn, and now our team is kind of get into a habit of checking in or committing to your changes to your repository, and also provide that visibility to others. Again, it's a Salesforce app, so all Salesforce developers are familiar in navigating to a tab, creating your views, and things like that. The last but not least, you still have to have a cleaner implementation. So if your test classes do not have good test best practices, And if you have dependent on platform data, Flowsum is not going to help you. You still have to make sure you write your code properly to make sure that it passes the validation, the test run gives a good coverage. Then Flowsum will help you with speeding up the migration process. What's next for us? We wanted to take Flowsum such way that admins can also join us in those celebrations and have a scheduled deployment, so they're not in the office early morning to do the deployments. And as part of the development checklist, we also wanted to have a checkpoint where we execute our test suites. So lately, we started creating test suites for lead, for account, and opportunity, and other custom objects, right? Custom functionality. So we say anyone touched anything on the lead, we want to run the test suites for lead to make sure that all other test classes are passing. And the last, pre-approved deployment for citizen developers. So that's an interesting thing. So we have Power Business users that do make configuration changes in our environment, not in production, but of course in the dev environment. So we wanted to onboard them into Flowsum, so they can also use the same practices as our regular IT team members. And talking of citizen developers, I would want you guys to go visit our friends. Today we have a citizen developer move over IT session at 4 to 4:30, and we have the taking control of profiles. So this is another thing. Our org with 10 years, we now have 150 profiles. This was done before the permission set, so we are trying to clean up, but we have a cool way to find out what's there in your profile. So, I'll open it up for questions, and thank you.
So how do you handle like manual deletions of fields and those things in Flosum?
You want to take it?
You said deletion of fields?
Deletion of fields and deletion of classes,
Okay.
all of the deletions in Salesforce.
Thank you. Deletion of fields or any other components is also handled by Flowsum because it provides a functionality of destructive changes. You can have pre-destructive or post-destructive. With a single patch, you can delete classes, triggers, or custom fields. That's with using that feature.
I have a question about how does Flowsum support like continuous integration or continuous delivery? I know you mentioned something about being able to schedule deployments, but could you schedule it so when you check into the repository, it automatically pushes to all of the dev environments or something like that?
That's a valid question. So if you see, we don't have any scheduled snapshot, right? So it's basically you want to have once a day, go take a snapshot of an environment and find the differences and commit it, right? So that's still not there. That's in our next step. We haven't tried with that yet, but that's in our plan.
But to add to that, there is a functionality called builds in Flowsum, which you could use for continuous integration if you want to capture all the changes that were done to a particular org in one day and move them to the repository or move them to another sandbox. That could be done. Sure.
You referred to rollbacks, but I didn't hear the details. So if you apply a patch, I'm assuming there is a feature that allows you to roll that patch back. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes. You with the click of a button, you can roll back the changes. But if you deploy the same patch multiple times or multiple patches over that patch, then the rollback process will be difficult. And also there is an additional functionality of merging the patches because no one project is going live at one point. And there are multiple projects going live, there are multiple patches, and you can combine, release admins can combine all those patches by merge functionality and deploy with one click.
This is a newbie question. So Salesforce says that you can use Git or GitHub, right? So what are the differences between Git and Flowsum? And why would you want to use Flowsum instead of Git?
So Flowsum is an app exchange app on Salesforce Cloud. So you do not have a separate admin team to manage your source control system using GitHub. I know we did do a POC on more than one solution before we selected Flowsum. This worked with us based on, it's because it's an app exchange and you have less maintenance. Anything you want to add?
Yes, from our readiness perspective, all our developers are very well aware of Salesforce functionality. And when moving to Flowsome was really easy because it's a native app in Salesforce. And tabs, page layouts, buttons, Salesforce developers are very aware and very comfortable with those things. So that's why they liked Flowsome immediately. We are not giving them a different tool. This is like, and we had a homegrown Salesforce solution before Flowsome, and it looked very similar. So that helped us.
For the repositories of the version control, there is a standard location, it's a custom object in Salesforce to store this kind of resources, or no, it's SVN or it's GitHub. How can I use the version control in Flowsome?
So Flowsome offers two things. It's a source control as well as a deployment management tool, right? So the one we chose to have both source control and deployment tool. So I don't know if it's a packaged combination or you could go with it separately, but it helped us to have it in one place so that when you build, you can pick and use the advantages of a version control.
So does it provide an option for deploying metadata and merging changes for, if a production org has customizations and we have changes in our metadata, can we merge those and deploy?
That's true. So Flowsome components, right, have both Apex and metadata, including profiles. So it's a combination of you have your metadata, like custom objects, fields, validation rules, workflow rules, etc., and you also have your Apex trigger controller classes. And you could combine them along with profile. It's just like building an ant package, but you don't need to build it yourself. So it's one tool to consolidate both of them.
But
So what about the metadata types that don't push out?
So far we have come across only one that Flowsome does not support. One is the custom metadata. That still has to be a manual step. Remember I said we have a place to record manual components. So custom metadata is something that you have to still do manually. And the rest of all is supported same like your chain set. Yes. Thank you.
We have developers who make custom changes and would use change management in this way. We also have a few people who make changes directly in production, mainly to small configuration changes. How would Flowsome handle that situation in merging things together?
You want to take it?
Yeah, very good question. And if you have that kind of a situation, which we also have with the production support, we recommend creating, from a process standpoint, and creating another sandbox for production support or quick fixes is like an express lane. You could move those changes quickly, but still use Flowsome because your repository is your master branch. And people should not go to production to look up the latest version of any component. They should go to the repository. That's the learning curve.
And we do have controls, basically, to add to that. The only tool that anyone can get to move from one instance to another is Flowsome. So we have pretty much taken away access for someone to directly go to your pre-prod and make a manual change, let's say. So they have to go through a process, and one of the next steps that we want to do is maybe for a simple lightweight configuration, let them do it in one environment, but use Flowsome to replicate it into all other instances. So you have a cleaner sandbox. So you don't have to worry. I don't know if my page layout is same in all instances, for instance. Right? That's a simple example we all think.
You touched on merging. Like if two developers edited the same Apex class, how do you guys resolve merges when you have like changes like that?
Sure. Especially conflict identification is done based on the latest checked version into the repository versus the latest checked version into your branch. So Flowsome compares the changed by, in this case, in these two, and you can click a link, view comparison. That would have been the the beautiful part of the demo. If I showed it, if you click that link, it brings up a side-by-side comparison of the two classes, and you can figure out if the changes that were the delta, if those are done all by you or somebody else. In this case, what we would have liked to is push that code to write when we do it in Beyond Compare or other tools, but it's not as easy as that, but you can identify the conflict at that point and not check into the repository and override other people's code. You could talk to the other developer as it shows you this is the developer who has the latest version in the repository who you have conflict with, and resolve manually.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining.